context for the next part of the conversation, where we look at some do's and don'ts to make this a little bit more tangible regarding how are we actually listening to our clients. We're going to start with some don'ts. Adriana, here are 4 things that we probably do all at one time or another. Probably nobody's perfect here as a listener. Let me just run these by you and see what you think. Do you sometimes assume that you know what your client is going to say and then stop listening? Imagine what happens when you do that. If you start listening to someone, you're tuned in, and then you go to where you think he or she is going and you stop listening. You lose the opportunity to hear what it is he or she really is going to say. But more importantly, he or she probably picks up from your body language or some other kind of signal that you're no longer listening. And you know what it's like when somebody stopped listening to you, right? You can immediately say, oh my gosh, so-and-so's not listening. And your desire to be in that conversation and in that relationship with that person at that moment immediately goes down to 0. Number 2, do you ever form a rebuttal in your head while your client is still speaking? If so, you may be listening to reply rather than listening to understand. There's a basic saying that you probably heard in listening, that is, seek to understand first, be understood second. And so that's a reminder to us to listen to others before we say what it is we feel compelled to say ourselves. And this is really hard to do, no doubt about it. But if we find ourselves forming a rebuttal or forming a response, essentially then we stopped listening. Once the conversation in our own head is no longer about what the client is talking about, we're no longer listening. Pure listening means the conversation is about what the other person wants it to be about, his agenda, her interests. As soon as you get into what you want to say or what you need to say, now you're in your agenda. That means you're no longer listening. Number 3, do you tune out when your client says something you don't agree with or don't want to hear? This is a really common one, and again, really hard to do. When the conversation turns to being about you, especially in a negative way, it's really, really hard to focus and concentrate on making it about understanding the client's perspective and not simply getting defensive. Finally, do you sometimes get caught up in a judgment about your client? When your client asks a question about something you just explained 5 minutes ago, you might ask yourself, what is this person stupid? I just explained the whole thing 5 minutes ago and here she is asking me again. Well, of course, again, if that's where your mind goes, you're back in your own mind, you're back in your own agenda, you're back in your own judgment. Now, I should repeat here that these are things we all do from time to time. So if any of these resonate for you or all of them resonate for you, don't worry about it. We're all on a journey to learning how to communicate better by learning how to listen better. So I'm just curious, out of these 4, which is the one that you think you would need to focus on in order to raise your listening game the most? Just type 1, 2, 3, or 4 into the chat box and let's see what we get. I see a lot of 1s, a lot of 2s, a couple of 4s.
Number 2 is a big one from where I stand.
1, 2, 2 and 4. Unfortunately, 1 and 2. Great. So you know what? Fortunate or unfortunate, it's the reality. We're all here at one time or another. But again, we can ask, what's our batting average? How often are you forming a rebuttal in your head and not allowing the client to finish whatever it is he wants to say before you start kind of like responding? And how often do you kind of cut off your own listening when you think you already know what the client is going to say? When we do that, what we're doing is revealing to ourselves that our own needs, our own interests in the relationship is more important to us at that moment than the others. If we suddenly, like taking number 1, for example, if we suddenly say, I know where the client is going, I don't need to listen anymore. What we're saying is my need to listen actually becomes less important than actually kind of making a conclusion about what the situation is. And unfortunately, when we do that, we've totally tuned the client out. Okay, let's move on to some do's. 4 do's here that we can practice, and the better we become at doing these, the more positive an impact it's going to have, not just in our business, but in our life. Number 1, do you concentrate on what's being said even when you're not interested? It's hard to do. It's very hard to do. Do you allow your client to vent negative feelings, especially about you, without getting defensive? Same thing. Really, really great if you can allow them to do that, to stay with them where they are, especially when the conversation is about you. You've probably had this experience with your clients, and you probably had it with your spouse at one time or another too. Do you ever restate instructions and messages just to make sure that you've got it right? Like they say in the Navy, the captain says, right degree rudder 30 degrees. And the person says, aye, aye, captain, right degree rudder 30 degrees. A simple practice to make sure that you're on the same page, because it's so easy to have a miscommunication. And finally, number 4, do you paraphrase what you believe the speaker is feeling? Perhaps you paraphrase from time to time what you think the client is saying or what you think the client is thinking. You might say, yep, I'm hearing that you're really frustrated with how the process is going so far, and you wish we had a better marketing approach. Got it. That's some of the facts. But the feeling part, the frustration part, the surprise, the anger, the fear, do you ever feed back what it is you're sensing in the other person simply by saying, wow, it sounds like you're quite nervous about this. Is that true? A simple statement like that can immediately tell the client you're there with them, not just with what they're thinking, but with what they're feeling. And the reason this is so important is we connect with other human beings by how we feel, not by how we think. If you want to connect with human beings, you need to have a feeling experience that's shared, not a thinking experience. This is why people who go to war together have relationships lifetime after that. They've experienced so much from an emotional point of view that for many people, those relationships become indelible. So if you can mix and match these particular listening habits more and try to reduce the others to some extent, you're absolutely going to have a more positive impact on all the clients you're working with. And what they're simply looking for is the opportunity to be heard, to have an experience to be related to. So just one question here, same as before. Which one of these 4 is one that you could probably use, if you could use more effectively or more frequently, to raise your game? Which is the one that you would choose? Please put 1, 2, 3, or 4 into the chat box. I see a lot of 3s, some 4s, and some 2s. 2, 3, 4. Yep, a lot of 4s. All right, 1, 2, 3, and 4. A couple of 2s. Got it. Thank you all for your input there. The point here is you don't need to be doing all 4 of these all the time. And you don't need to be doing any one of these all the time. But a really good listener is employing these different strategies over time, over a whole set of conversations, maybe over a set of one conversation. You might be doing 2, 3, or 4 of these things. So what both of these these previous slides bring up is the importance for us to listen with intention, to listen with purpose, not just to hear the words as they come to us and respond by flying by the seat of our pants. That's how most conversation happens. And it's probably okay for most objective listening opportunities. But in the ones that are empathetic, we need to be a little bit more thoughtful, sensitive, intentional.